Does anybody else feel like if they hear one more cycling friend talk about heat training, their head is going to explode? No? Just me? Heat training is one of the, if not the biggest trend in endurance sports training right now. What used to be used only at certain times of year to get ready for particularly hot races is now ubiquitous amongst the pros and performed all year long. Now, if you're thinking, Dylan, how have you not done a video on heat training already? Aren't you supposed to be keeping up with the latest cycling science or whatever? Well, I actually did do a video on this over 5 years ago, well before it was what all the cool kids are doing, and to be honest, not very many people watched it or cared, which really just goes to show how much the conversation around heat training has exploded in the last 5 years. Okay, I think the reason why no one watched 5 years ago is because you looked like you just barely hit puberty. And you had a foot of excess steer tube sticking out of your bike for some reason. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down what the science has to say about all things heat training. We're talking how effective it actually is, what physiological changes you can expect, the best methods for implementing it, and practical considerations that you need to keep in mind before starting with a heat training protocol. You can absolutely screw up heat training, and at best it just won't be effective, but at worst it can actually be detrimental or even cause damage. Welcome back to the channel. This video is fueled by the feed. Alright, I'm sure that if you clicked on this video, then you are aware that some sort of heat training has some sort of beneficial effect on performance. But just in case there are some skeptics out there, and believe me, I am among you, this is what the current scientific literature has to say about how much heat training can impact your performance. A good example is this study on heat acclimation and exercise performance, which took 12 cyclists and put them through a 10-day heat acclimation where they rode at 50% of their VO2 max in 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a very easy pace, just done in very hot conditions. We will get into specifics on what protocol to follow in just a minute, but for now, let's focus on results. When looking at metrics like VO2 max, time trial performance, and power at lactate threshold, it's probably not surprising that there were improvements in performance when testing in the heat. But what is perhaps surprising is that performance also improved when measuring performance in cooler conditions as well. As far as how much change you can expect to see, in the heat, VO2 max improved by 8%, time trial performance by 8%, and power at lactate threshold by 5%. In cooler conditions, the results weren't as impressive, but they were still substantial at 5% increase in VO2 max, 6% improvement in time trial performance, and 5% for power at lactate threshold. The control group that didn't do this heat training protocol saw none of these changes. This is of course just one study, but it's one of many that come to the same conclusion. Heat training works, and not only does it work for riding in the heat, but it works for riding in cooler conditions too. I remember a time when heat training was really only done in preparation for a hot race or event. That just intuitively makes sense. But given this research, it's really no surprise that World Tour teams and keen amateurs alike are starting to embrace heat training year-round as a training tool. A 5 to 8% improvement is nothing to scoff at. That is a massive gain for racers and even riders just trying to stay in the bunch in their local group ride or improve their general fitness. The question now is, why? Why would riding in the heat make me faster, especially if it's not hot out? I don't think one person asked that question. Just tell us what's faster and then show us where to buy it like a proper cycling YouTuber, okay? So, what exactly is happening in your body when you heat train that results in the ability to push more watts the next time you get on the bike? This review on adaptation to heat acclimation summarizes all the physiological adaptations to heat training nicely. They found that after acclimation, your core body temperature, both at rest and during exercise, is reduced. You'll start sweating quicker and at a higher rate, your skin temperature is reduced, you have improved skin blood flow, you will lose less electrolytes in your sweat, and your total body water and plasma volume are increased. All of that is well and good and will certainly help you manage heat better, but if you are an endurance athlete, here is where things start to get Very interesting. Massive improvements across the board in cardiovascular function, which include the following: a lower heart rate, an increased stroke volume, a better sustained cardiac output, better defended blood pressure, increased myocardial compliance, increased myocardial efficiency, and improved cardioprotection. And the relevant benefits don't stop there. As we get to the muscles, we see spared muscle glycogen, increased lactate threshold, lower lactate levels, and increased force production. Also of note, whole body metabolic rate is lowered and thermal tolerance is improved. The last minute of this video may sound like a sleazy used car salesman trying to sell you on the benefits of heat training with all these supposed benefits, but the reality is that riding your bike in the heat really just does a lot of positive things for your body. So assuming that you've been fully convinced on the benefits of heat training at this point, let's discuss how you actually go about doing it. There are a lot of different methods for heat acclimation. Some are as simple as going for a ride when it's hot out. Go figure. That is, of course, assuming that it's actually hot outside. Then we have various sauna protocols and riding indoors dressed in winter training gear or a more fancy dedicated sweatsuit. But are any of these necessarily better than the other, or can you just pick the one that's the most convenient for you? This study actually set out to answer that very question by having cyclists complete a 10-day heat acclimation protocol in one of 3 interventions. The first did 50 minutes of cycling per day in 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The second did 50 minutes of cycling in normal temperatures, but while wearing thermal clothing. And the third did 50 minutes of cycling immediately followed by 25 minutes of hot water immersion. The results? No difference between any of the protocols in cycling performance in hot conditions, and it was found that all 3 methods were equally effective. Research seems to suggest that the method isn't super important, but heating bouts should be at least 30 minutes long. As far as the number of sessions it takes to acclimate, it happens surprisingly quickly. Some studies suggest in as few as 5 sessions. For example, this study on the time course of heat acclimation found that all of the physiological benefits from heat acclimation came in the first 5 to 6 days, but to be on the safe side, you will probably want to acclimate for a full week, and some studies do suggest as long as 2 weeks to really ensure full acclimation. That being said, the more well-trained you are already, the faster you will heat acclimate, likely because well-trained athletes are already partially heat adapted just by the nature of raising their body temperature during exercise and by having a higher aerobic capacity than untrained individuals. It appears that 1 week of heat training for at least 30 minutes a day is enough to get most of, if not all of the benefits of heat acclimation. The type of acclimation that you choose doesn't seem to be particularly important as long as you are raising your core body temperature enough. This can include riding in the heat, obviously. It can also include riding indoors with lots of clothes on or a sweatsuit with no fan at a low power output for say 45 minutes or so. Or if you have access to something like a sauna or even a hot bath, jumping in straight after a ride for 30 to 40 minutes. Doing the sauna or hot bath immediately following a ride is not absolutely necessary for acclimation, but it will likely induce a larger response with a greater rise in core temperature and increased heat shock protein synthesis. An important thing to keep in mind is that heat training is not a more is always better phenomenon. Let's be honest, most things in life are not. But with heat training specifically, it appears that doing more than what is necessary to acclimate is not extra beneficial, and it may even be detrimental. Even doing it at the wrong times can be detrimental. For example, this study on optimizing heat training for endurance athletes had subjects do either a week of heat training during low intensity or heat training during high intensity, and then of course they had a control group that did no heat training. What they found was that although the heat training with low intensity group saw an increase in time trial performance due to the heat acclimation, the high intensity group actually fared no better than the control group by the end of the study, likely due to increased fatigue. As cyclists, we have a tendency to want to push ourselves to the maximum, but combining high intensity, long hours, and heat is just not necessary, and it may even set you back. In fact, I would suggest that during your first week of heat acclimation, when you're doing 5 to 7 days of heat training in a row, make it a relatively low intensity and low volume week so that you can be sure you aren't overdoing it. I also try to avoid doing high intensity workouts in the heat if I can help it. This is because being overheated will decrease your performance in that workout, and the excessive heat stress on top of the high intensity may be too much to handle. At the end of the day, I will often go for a better safe than sorry approach when it comes to heat training. Dude, we get it. If you want to tell us that you're struggling with low testosterone, you can just come out and say it, bro. Once you are heat acclimated though, the stress from heat training shouldn't be as high, and maintaining that acclimation requires much less of a commitment. In fact, research seems to indicate that doing heat training just once or twice a week after acclimation is completed is enough to maintain acclimation. Heat acclimation really does appear to be about a 1-week commitment, and then after that, it really shouldn't be too difficult to maintain with just a couple sessions a week after that. In fact, if you are heat acclimating into the summer to prepare yourself for hotter weather, you probably won't even need to do a dedicated heat training session after the acclimation process is done. Riding on semi-regular hot days will be more than enough to maintain. It should be mentioned too that certain products like the core body temperature sensor are taking the guesswork out of heat training by making sure your core temperature is elevated enough during training sessions to properly acclimate. This video is not sponsored by Core in any way, but I did want to mention them for all the tech geeks out there and the people who just want to be positive that they are heat training effectively. There is an optimal core temperature for acclimation at around 38.5 degrees Celsius or 101 Fahrenheit. Raising core temperature beyond this point accrues no additional benefits. A core temperature that's too low may be less effective, but a core temperature that's too high may be dangerous or detrimental. So something like this can give you peace of mind as you acclimate. And this should probably go without saying, but you need to be mindful of your hydration when you take on one of these heat acclimation weeks. Weighing yourself regularly to make sure that you aren't losing too much fluid and taking on more electrolytes than normal is generally a good idea. Also, just like your fitness on the bike, if you do nothing to maintain your heat acclimation, you will eventually lose it. There isn't a consensus on how long it takes to lose acclimation, but studies seem to indicate that it may take 2 to 4 weeks depending on a number of different factors, and certain physiological adaptations from heat training are lost quicker than others, like the changes in heart rate, for example. It should also be noted that how quickly you acclimate can be influenced by many different factors, some of which are in your control and some of which are not. For example, women may require more heat sessions or a greater thermal stress to achieve acclimation. Those from hot climates acclimate faster. If you have already been acclimated, then reacclimating again may happen in as little as 2 to 4 sessions instead of a full week. And finally, if life weren't already unfair enough for the genetically inferior out there, it appears that those with a higher VO2 max acclimate quicker and once acclimated have a better heat tolerance. And while we're at it, if you are planning to do a high altitude race or event but live at low altitude and have no way of altitude acclimating before the event, then heat acclimation can act as a poor man's altitude acclimation. From this review on altitude camps and heat acclimation, the effects of both heat training and altitude training share the same beneficial physiological adaptations of boosting blood volume, which in turn improves performance. It probably won't be as good as actual altitude training for a high altitude event, but it's a heck of a lot better than doing nothing at all. Although you probably won't be able to play the "I live at sea level" excuse quite as hard as you usually do. Thanks for watching. If you want to step up your training to the next level, then I have coaches available through Ignition Coach Co. and online training plans available through Training Peaks, both linked down in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe, and share it with your cycling friends. I'll see you in the next one.